Let's do it.
We're live. Harry, how you doing?
Good. It's weird to hear that name because it's definitely not my real name.
um, so a fellow, first of all, fellow Newf.
Yeah,
Where are you from in Newfoundland?
I was born in Buren, and then when I was 3, we moved to Grand Falls, Windsor, and then I stayed there until I was 21, and then we moved to BC, and I've been in BC ever since.
Cool.
How about you?
I'm from St. John's, and lived there until I was 21, I guess, and then moved to China and never really went back other than a couple stints. I mean, I've been visited, every year usually, but only stayed long term once or twice, like for a year in that 17-year period. Not that anyone will care about this at all, but I'm curious, what was growing up in Grand Falls like?
I would say it wasn't that bad. I think I was lucky for the schooling that I got and the class that I had. Like I was in French immersion, so it was like a consistent class all the way through.
Right.
And like having moved to BC, I kind of look back and admire how not woke it was back then.
Right.
Like basically the mentality around like race and stuff like that was what I considered to be still the ideal, which is just colorblind. Just kind of treating people for who they are rather than what they look like or whatever. And then since moving to BC, I've kind of gradually, I think I was so innocent when I moved here, and then I just kind of started seeing this like woke, just very racist view of the world, which has been kind of surprising. But yeah, I still look back at Newfoundland and be like, they have the right mentality around it.
Why do you think that is? I mean, it's always been like a attribute of Newfies, that they were friendly and inviting and that kind of stuff. And I would say probably particularly the case like around the Bay, right? Like outside of St. John's. But why do you think that is, that, the people there had that attitude? They weren't kind of tainted by, more mainstream or I don't know what you want to call the views that see people through, the lens of race or religion or that kind of stuff. But, the woke viewpoint, broadly speaking.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I don't think I have a great theory on it.
Do you think that's sorry, go ahead.
No, you can go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, do you think that's just kind of like simple rural people generally, like, and maybe those that have had a bit of a harder life than like the people that lived in a urban environment where everything perhaps was more convenient? Like, I don't know, because it's, you usually get that kind of down home vibe from rural people, right? Like, look, be honest, do your work, and I don't really care about any of your other immutable attributes or characteristics. I'm generalizing, of course, but
yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think that might have something to do with it. I would say that the most recent time that I visited, it seems like the gender stuff has become front and center. Like every single group that I ran into ended up talking about it at some point.
really?
So I guess I would think they were more sheltered in the past from like social media stuff. So that has started to, I think.
But are you talking about younger people, or this would even be the case for like the older crowd?
It was quite a mixture. Like I know some friends who are teachers, so they had issues in their school with LGBTQ stuff. And then like other adults, like they all knew about the teacher in Ontario with the fake boobs. So everyone was talking about that.
Was that a troll? Like, was that dude just trolling?
That's a good question.
I feel like I heard some reports or comments or, some passing scroll on Twitter that like the dude was just making a farce out of it all to prove a point. But then the story kind of fizzled out, which kind of makes you think that was the case, because it really like a lot of people got wrapped up in it. And if it turned out to be a farce and there was an egg on their face, I can see why they kind of wanted it to just, go away.
Yeah,
but I
totally.
don't know. I don't know what actually happened.
Um, Actually, one thing I was surprised with last time I visited Newfoundland was the amount of people who were, one, talking about inflation without me bringing it up, and then two, like in support of Pierre Poilievre. Uh, that was actually pretty surprising. Like people who I would never talk about politics really. Um, but it
Well,
seems
that's
like they
good.
are, yeah, I think they're hurting there in terms of the economic situation, and
Yeah.
people who are making like 50 grand a year and have a family, and now they're like really seeing what inflation is doing to them. So that was definitely a positive.
I feel like one of the things that um, seems quite common in Newfoundland, Atlantic Canada, but even in Canada more broadly, because Canada's among the, let's say, so-called nicer or at least more pacifist sort of populations, is that kind of mentality. Let's say Newfoundland, right? Like it's known for being welcoming and open and friendly, but that kind of mentality can easily allow for really stupid and harmful policies to not receive the requisite pushback, because people kind of want to go along to get along, and they're kind of pacifist, and they don't want to be seen as being not like lacking compassion or lacking consideration or respect. Like, and I guess the easy way of saying that is like there's kind of a lot of de facto virtue signaling because of that. It's because like people just will adopt what the dominant frame suggests is the virtuous perspective or point of view on something, and very few people want to upset the apple cart. I mean, and again, I'm painting with broad brushstrokes here, and there's many exceptions, of course, but that's one of the things that always has grinded my gears, let's say, about Newfoundland. It's like there's not enough. There doesn't seem to be, to me, to be enough people that will just stand up and think for themselves and have the courage to say so. Everyone just kind of like, oh, like this is what good people do, and this is what the nice friendly perspective on things is. Okay, like that's what we'll do because we're nice and friendly and good. And I just like, I don't know, it's pretty off-putting to me that so few people are willing to stand up and speak their mind and develop their own perspective, number one, and then have the courage to speak it. But it's good to hear that people are at least open to a different perspective, I guess, represented in kind of being supportive of, let's say, Pierre, even though it's in the political realm and all the drawbacks of that. But at least it's representation that they're open to change, from what's been the dominant perspective and political ideas of the last, I don't know, decade.
Yeah, I would say what you described with the like kind of complacency, I've seen that just as much, if not more, in BC as in
Really?
Newfoundland. Um, yeah,
That's
but
a very like liberal woke haven too, though, right? Like I think that
true.
the Eastern Canada has always been very liberal, and Western Canada has always been very woke. And politically, that'll mean NDP, Liberal, Green sort of mix. But I mean, you're in, BC is possibly one of the most woke places in the world, with possible exceptions of like Western like Western coast of the U.S. and New York and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's a great point. Um, to me, like if we're going to talk about things that are not great about Newfoundland, to me, one of the biggest things growing up, and I especially felt it when I moved, is the lack of like entrepreneurial spirit in Newfoundland.
Mm.
I feel like on the West Coast, it's very much like you can build something, you can like make a difference to things, whereas Newfoundland is like, I mean,
Get a job with
a
the
big,
government.
yeah, exactly. A lot of people who stay in small towns, that's what they end up doing. And
Yeah.
then the government's tentacles, although like if you look at Newfoundland, you think it's like a way to kind of uh, escape things like this nice wilderness, this island with a small population, but really the government has its tentacles like all across Newfoundland. And it's really like, you can see how it could have caused a lot of the problems there with like the fisheries, and then people going on EI and doing the EI
Mm.
rotation where they plan it to be laid off so they can maximize the amount of EI they get. And then looking at like the obesity there is absolutely insane.
Hmm.
Um, And yeah, I guess it's a good place to look and see if Bitcoin eventually fixes it.
Well, Bitcoin will eventually fix everywhere, I guess. So Newfoundland will be swept up in that, whether they like it or not, at some point. And I hate to be hating on it because I absolutely love the place. I mean,
Agreed.
Most of us love the places that we're from, and I just think, of course, I'm biased, right? But I just think Newfoundland is like a magical sort of place. Like it's different, and I love it. And every time I go there, I have a very strong connection to the place. But obviously, I'm critical about how things operate above the surface, let's say. And yeah, you're right that, government is a massive employer on the island. I'd love to know precisely how big of an employer, but I think it's probably probably over 20%, maybe well over that. I don't really know, but I'm sure it's huge. And the population, like you said, I mean, again, there's a lot of entrepreneurship, but in relative terms, people want, this is the problem, that the state, the perverse incentives that the state as an employer and the state as the dominant capital allocator generates is because, like, why wouldn't you want a job with the government? You have very few responsibilities. You have all the benefits. You have reasonably good pay. You have a consistent increase in pay over time. You have tremendous job security. Like it's the primary, like no other job offers the same incentives unless it's a job where you have much higher upside for reward, but it's going to require much more work from you and much much broader skill set and that kind of stuff. But if you just kind of want to coast, why would you want any other job than the one with the government? It ticks all the boxes as well as they can be ticked. And that's the problem. And everyone ends up working for the government, working in an industry where there is no incentive to innovate, there is no incentive to be capital efficient. And you just get misallocation, capital destruction, and you get the situation they're in, which both the province and the country are in, which are basically they're bankrupt. And the only thing they can do is continue to print money or ask for federal bailouts. But as you know, the federal government is effectively bankrupt as well. And so, well, what do? You print money until the whole thing goes to shit, basically. I don't see, and to be fair, this characterizes a lot of other places around the world. The allure of government spending and government employment is great everywhere. And that's, very much by virtue of the fact that they have that magical money printer in the basement. And so they get to direct the incentives. They get to generate, they get to have the dominant incentive in the market. And so they get to offer all these jobs and all this type of compensation and security and stuff. And no wonder. And of course it crowds out the private markets, obviously, because it's competing for that capital. It's competing for that, those human resources. Like it's so obvious, but
yeah, yeah, it really
I
is.
guess so few people see it.
Yeah. And speaking of like coasting, so I think so much of Newfoundland is set up to make that coasting lifestyle so appealing, in that you have the government paying people with these safe jobs. And then like, although Newfoundland is beautiful in its nature, like the outdoors, it's also got the miserable weather. So it's easier to just kind of stay inside, eat crappy food, drink beer every weekend, and then just get into this repetition of just going to like a comfortable job where you're not doing anything, and then getting fat. And I mean, I hate saying so much negativity because Newfoundland is beautiful, but yeah, the incentive, like you said, I really try to look at the incentives of everything. I think, is it Charlie Munger's quote, although he's kind of lost my respect lately, but you show me the incentives, I'll show you the outcome.
Right.
It definitely applies big time to Newfoundland. And yeah, I really am. I'm hoping that they can transition to the Bitcoin future, I guess, without too much pain for all these people who are kind of trapped in a kind of government cushion.
Yeah. Well, I mean, anything can happen, right? I mean, my overarching philosophy is that nobody is coming to save you, right? And you have to save yourself. And so don't hold your breath for, the political winds to change. I mean, just opt out and opt in to what you think is right and good and productive and all that kind of stuff now. And if everyone were to do that, then we'd have something more akin to people making free choices for themselves and all the benefits that provides. But that being said, I mean, it's helpful if there's more open-minded leadership, whether look at someone like Bukele in El Salvador, whatever your take on him is, he's probably been a net benefit for the people of El Salvador in terms of the opportunities available and the freedoms available and all that kind of stuff. And, Polyev is kind of another good example of that. And Danielle Smith in Alberta seems to be another example of that. I mean, she's very much anti all the bullshit that's happened in the last 2 years, anti the woke stuff, anti the WEF stuff. And, I don't know the details of this Alberta Sovereignty Act that she's now tabling, but like, that's good. That's, getting away from the overbearing control of the central federal government and at least bringing that down to a more local level. That's great. And having someone there who's more open to different ideas, I think that at least makes it easier for the case to be made for something like Bitcoin to have a more favorable treatment, number one, so individuals can more easily make that choice. And then if they want to do anything on a provincial level, then who knows? So there's a possibility that could happen in Newfoundland. But again, it's not really known for leading the way with new ideas and taking risks and that kind of stuff. I mean, they've kind of been pacifists, like, well, sure, we'll do what you want us to do. Just give us some money, basically. I'm going to stop now because I hate myself for being so negative on them. But you know what I'm saying? Like that possibility exists. So hopefully some sort of change happens there, and people, wake up to new ideas and they're willing to take the responsibility themselves to pursue them. So fingers crossed, I guess.
Ultimately, it's the sooner they see the Bitcoin future, the better, because either they're going to come across through pain or they're going to come across through curiosity and like hope for a better future.
Yeah.
Speaking of politics, one thing I've kind of been thinking more and more in the way that as Bitcoiners, we're almost becoming our own nation in a way. Totally. And to me, I feel like more patriotic towards Bitcoin than any country. And like, if I traveled somewhere, some people like to go to like a pub where it's like a Canadian pub or an American pub or whatever. But to me, it'd be much more appealing to go to a Bitcoin pub.
Of course.
And I just think that mentality of like joining this nation in a way of like very competent people with like higher values and integrity and who value truth is just such an appealing thing.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. And I mean, that's natural, right? Because you identify more with people who share your values. And so like, obviously there's a lot of shared values wrapped up in why you might be interested in Bitcoin and all that jazz. So, but I think I wrote a piece about maybe before Bitcoin 2021, basically about that, and saying that Bitcoiners are my people and, Bitcoin is basically my country. That's what I feel the most identified with and the most allegiance to, not the place. Again, like even though there is some weird connection to the physical geography where you were born, that's kind of where, like I don't by default feel that same degree of alignment with everyone else who was born in that same geographic area. But I was talking about this with someone like yesterday, and the ideal case would be there's no passports, right? And just we go back to the way it presumably was like in the late 1800s or something, where people can travel more freely. But if we're still going with that model, I mean, wouldn't it be great to have like a kind of Bitcoin passport as like and countries would favor it, because they wanted to attract Bitcoiners in their capital and, intellectual, financial, and otherwise. Wouldn't that be kind of like it's not that far-fetched, I guess. I mean, if more places pop up, you have El Salvador and Madeira, and I think this trend will continue, a la sovereign individual thesis. How do you identify yourself as a so-called Bitcoiner? Is it just like signing a transaction, or is it a proof of some kind? Is it, getting a passport and that being the proof? Like, who knows, right? But it's kind of fun to think about how your identity with that sort of a group might be expressed in the future.
Yeah, and that brings up an interesting question of like, what is a Bitcoiner? And then versus someone who just holds Bitcoin.
Right.
I think it's always going to be valuable to be able to identify who's a Bitcoiner, because that tells a lot more about them than if they're just holding Bitcoin in the hopes of getting more US dollars.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like,
what do you think a Bitcoiner is, if I can put you on the spot? I know it's an ongoing discussion about what legitimate answers are, let's say, but what's your opinion?
To me, a Bitcoiner is someone who's genuinely interested in using Bitcoin as their money. So that means Bitcoin has an infinite demand to a Bitcoiner. So it's not like, oh, I got in early, so I'm going to cash out later. That mentality is completely antithetical to being a Bitcoiner. So a Bitcoiner would say, I want to have more Bitcoin next year than I do this year. I want to have more Bitcoin tomorrow than I do today. So that's kind of, I think, a key aspect of it. And then also just how you, if it's your main issue in how you vote and how you make decisions, and like your principles around it. I don't like if you create an exchange that has a bunch of garbage on it. I think that's antithetical to being a Bitcoiner. And then also seeing if you believe that Bitcoin is going to bring about a much brighter future, and it's not just like a financial asset.
Mm. Yeah, I agree. And obviously there's no right answer to that question, or at least no one has a monopoly on the right answer. But it does seem like your philosophies would almost have to be imbued with the attributes or the results of the attributes of Bitcoin. So like in the things that it either prohibits or permits, like if you adopt it as your money and you think it should be kind of the basis for, or you think it will be the basis because of its attributes of value exchange, money, global trade, civilization, you'd have to de facto accept some of those principles, which is why I always find it somewhat strange that there are like so-called communists or like socialists or progressives that call themselves Bitcoiners as well, because it's one thing to say, I believe in, I don't know, charitable causes, or I'd like to commit some of my capital to helping the underserved or whatever. But Bitcoin itself does not permit your property to be violated, at least insofar as it's held in Bitcoin, right? And so how can you adhere or ascribe to a political philosophy that requires the redistribution of wealth in order to fill in the blank, do whatever, it doesn't matter. I feel like that's a weird maybe kind of cognitive dissonance that people maybe haven't fully resolved within themselves yet.
Yeah. I'm curious to see how many people who get into Bitcoin transition from being socialist or communist to more libertarian leaning, as that kind of, they have to face that cognitive dissonance eventually. I'd be really curious to know like how many people have changed. For me, I was very much like libertarian, borderline anarchist long before I got into Bitcoin. So I think I was a Bitcoiner before I found Bitcoin. Is kind of the best way to describe it.
Right. I fall into that category too, but I'm intrigued because I'll say this kind of in a funny way, but I don't meet that many anarchists from Grand Falls. So what was your
it's lonely there.
What was your story in developing that sort of philosophy on things?
My uncle recommended Free to Choose to me, the Milton Friedman book, and I ended up watching the series when I was in university. And then I didn't even know the word libertarian at that point, but I knew that like the way people look at government in such a superficial level and thinking that it will solve problems without considering the collateral damage or the other effects that it has. Like I really understood that, and I wanted a smaller government. And then eventually in like 2015 or so, I found out about the Libertarian Party. And then I was like, wait, I'm not like, I'm against, or I'm for gun control, because I'd never thought about it in depth. And I just assumed, oh, it's safe in Canada. It feels safe. We have gun control. And then I made that like connection where I shouldn't have. Then I just kind of went down the rabbit hole of what libertarian principles are, and that I love things that are logically consistent. And I've always been in math. Like math's always been my favorite subject. So yeah, it's just so consistent, and it's so easy to find flaws in the reasoning of any other ideologies. So, and actually around when I found out about libertarianism is also when I found out about Bitcoin. But then I read the white paper. I was such a purist that I didn't want to buy it on an exchange. I wanted to buy it from an ATM, and I just did not get around to it. And then the ATM at the store that I was going to buy it was gone because the store closed down. And I was just like, oh, that's okay, I'll buy some later. And I think around that time I was turned off by, I realized that 7 transactions per second. And I'm a software developer. So I heard that and I was like, okay, so this is like not going to get us what we need. And I didn't have the foresight to see that it could have layers on top of it. So then I just kind of said, oh, I'll just kind of wait and see what happens. I don't need to take any risks at this point in my life. And then I heard of it like going up and down and up and down. And then actually when Elon Musk bought it, I was like, okay, maybe it's time to look at crypto again. And I still just saw it as like crypto. I did not realize the difference between Bitcoin and the rest of it. And then actually from there, I got into Monero because I thought
like,
fungibility
like a good
was,
anarchist.
Yeah, exactly. So I was like, oh, I knew that fungibility was something that bothered me when I studied Bitcoin before. So it was fungibility and the transaction limits that kind of impeded me, or I saw them as problems with it. So yeah, then I got into Monero for a bit, and then eventually I watched a Svetsky video where he was talking. He was on a Monero podcast, and he just made great points. And then I said, okay, I need to dig in more to Bitcoin. And then ever since, like finding Jeff Booth and Michael Saylor and like your podcast, I've just become completely obsessed. But I'm a relative newcomer, I would say, because it's only been like a year and a half.
Yeah.
It feels like it's been like 5 years, because I've just I'm just like so engulfed in Bitcoin stuff that yeah,
Bitcoin time is weird, man. Like I just think about I remember the March 2020 like sell off to 4K or whatever, and like there was a Swan podcast that we did like with Guy and Brady and I don't know, a few other people, and we were just kind of seeing how everyone was doing, right? Like how's everybody feeling about this big sell off? And most of us were just like checking the couch cushions to see if we could find any loose change or anything like that to buy more Bitcoin. And that feels like a decade ago. And I guess it's coming up on 3 years ago, but it feels so long ago. So I understand how, I mean, everyone has that impression that Bitcoin time is just like, it distorts time in some weird way. But what's it, you said you were kind of a Bitcoiner before Bitcoin, at least, philosophically and politically and that kind of stuff. I love to discuss and am fascinated by kind of what you just described. Like when the penny drops and people actually get what's going on, then like kind of a lot of things can change, right? Your perception of a lot of stuff, an understanding of this really bleeds into many other areas, and that can be very impactful or influential in people's lives more broadly. Has the last year and a half since that's happened to you been interesting in any other domains, or have you refined your thinking in other domains or in other ways or anything like that?
Yeah, I would say I feel a lot more peace, like internal peace,
right,
and less conflict. I've always been like, I like to save my money. I don't like
Well,
to spend it.
sorry to interrupt. Let's
Sure.
not gloss over that first point first. Like, and of course I know exactly what you're referring to, but I'm just curious, like, how do you think that's being generated? You know, like what piece in relation to what? Like where does that put some meat on that bone for me?
Okay. I've so I'm a minimalist, and to me, the idea of working and storing your savings in Bitcoin is just a minimalist like dream. Not only in the sense that it's a simple thing, but the fact that you take full custody of what you are of your property, um, and that you don't have to worry about investing in companies that you might find morally unacceptable.
Mm.
There's nothing more frustrating to me than like buying stock in a company and then they do something that I just completely disagree with, like Apple recently with AirDrop.
Yeah.
So just being in something where like you're aligned with it, like practically, morally, in so many ways, it just aligns. And it's just simple. So I'm a software developer. I was working at an agency for like 5 years, and then I left that job, and I felt like very uncertain about the future, I would say. And then basically, I was looking at, okay, based on how much money I'm making, I'm not going to achieve like the financial independence that I want. That's always been my goal. And so I was like, okay, I need to work on my own. I need to take more risks. And I left my job, which I actually love that job. And then since discovering Bitcoin, now I see it as it changes the trajectory for anyone who, like, for their career, basically. So whereas now you need to take those risks, you need to invest in things, and then if you make the right bets, I would say you can achieve decent wealth. Or if you're okay having your balls in a vice by the government by taking on a lot of debt. And I hate that. But then the simplicity of the Bitcoin alternative, which is it's better to work in the present than it is in the future, always. So like you could be a janitor 1 year and make the same as what a doctor will make in 5 or 10 years. So you're highly incentivized to work. You're rewarded for working in the present, and then that savings will much more quickly achieve financial independence. And then as you become more financially independent, I think you'll be able to take more risks in investing and actually invest in things that you're passionate and care about. So if that's the future that Bitcoin creates, then that's what gives me peace, is feeling like, okay, I've actually returned to the job I left. Because I want to collect more Bitcoin. And then hopefully I'll gradually be able to work more and more on the projects that I'm passionate about.
Right. Which itself would bring you more peace, right? Because you're more focused on and more devoting of your time and attention to something that energizes you or something that brings you joy and fulfillment, rather than
exactly
struggling against your own, your own resistance, let's say.
Yeah. And being able to remove so much noise. So like before Bitcoin, I was like looking at stocks, I was looking at real estate. I have no interest in buying a house. I have no interest in maintaining the house or any of the property tax or caring about what the government does in the area. But just being able to remove all of that noise and just throw it out. And then it's just Bitcoin and then the other things you care about. And just, having that ability to just kind of relax and focus on what you want to focus on is the best gift.
Totally. And I ask because like so many people have explicitly said that, and of course a lot of people are feeling it, and it is a sense of peace and also clarity. Like just things become much more simple and things become much more quiet inside, and that reduction in noise and that simplicity allows you to identify and focus on things that are of greater value that you may not even have had the time or capability of even discovering before. And now you get to discover and then, slowly refine that and figure out how you're going to engage it more fully. But, it's so fascinating that when you have something that you have such a high degree of certainty is going to be there for you in the future, and you have such high conviction on the principles on which it's predicated, and you have such a high conviction on the process that it's currently in the midst of, like, again, like you don't have to worry about doing all those financial activities that otherwise, that to ensure that your money's there for you in the future, right? As you said, speculating in real estate or in the stock market or anything. You also don't have to encounter that resistance of like, and let's say very few people invest in this way, but it sounds like you're someone who at least consider these things like, well, I don't want to invest in companies that do stuff that I don't agree with. But do I have to? Because that's how I get my returns and that's how I preserve my capital. And so that's a type of noise. That's a type of resistance that you can just let go of, and it can wash away. And there's so many things like that that just Bitcoin allows to, or helps to dissolve. And then you're just left in this state, almost like it's not like this was planned. You just kind of realize over time, it's like, and another huge, element of noise, let's say, is the risk of someone else custodying your wealth. And before we just accepted it, right? Because every asset, more or less, like had some form of counterparty risk, if not complete counterparty custody. And once you are able to fully custody something yourself, all that other stuff just seems way too risky. Like I look at, I don't have any assets other than Bitcoin, primarily because I look at them, I'm like, no, like you're telling me that my access to my capital and the optionality that provides me is contingent upon business hours, trusting management teams, trusting, security protocols and technology stacks and jurisdictions and governments and incompetence and malice of the individual, like all that stuff. No fucking way. I don't like that is a ton of noise and concern that I don't want to inject into my awareness. So, and Bitcoin allows you to do that. And it's only over the course of time that you realize how peaceful and how quiet and the focus that begins to emerge, or that begins to be permitted by that reduction in noise. It's not really talked about that much, but seems very real to a lot of the people that I talk about it with.
Yeah, I wonder how this could be used as an orange pilling thing. To maybe I should focus on that more when I'm talking.
Worry less about everything by Bitcoin.
Yeah, it lets you like the simplicity of it. Although, yeah,
enlightenment in 12 words, something like that.
Yeah, I actually, speaking of custody, that's as a developer, that's one thing I'm quite opinionated on. I know this is not a particularly technical podcast. But I feel like there's still a lot of risk in how many people are managing their Bitcoin, and they don't realize how much trust they're still putting in certain companies when they do it. I'll give I guess two examples.
Elaborate. Tell me where you see the risk.
A big one is Casa, which is in the spotlight right now. But I've always when I looked at that from the beginning, it's one of their main plans is a 2 of 3 multi-sig. And the model is they have one key, you have one hardware key, and then you have one key on their mobile wallet. Yeah, but on the phone is in their app.
Right.
And so anyone who uses that system, Casa owns their Bitcoin from a theoretical perspective, because Casa owns the key. Casa owns the software. The software is closed source. They could put whatever they want in there, and they could take your key. So like the fact that I was kind of surprised that is not scrutinized more heavily, given that it's like their whole point of existence is to make sure you don't lose your Bitcoin, yet they're taking theoretical custody. And then another example is Cold Card, which is a great device, don't get me wrong. But the amount of trust you're still putting into the Cold Card, if it's your only signing device, is huge. I mean, it doesn't matter what keys you press. If you are rolling dice to give it randomness, you're still trusting the Cold Card did the randomness, that the hardware has integrity. So
wouldn't that be the case for most, if not all, hardware wallets?
Absolutely, it is. Yeah, Trezor. Yeah, I just picked cold card because it's considered the like recommended one. But if you just get a cold card, you're still putting tremendous trust in that company. So the safest route, in my opinion, although again, as you get safer, it becomes more complicated, and that adds risk as well. But really, you should have multi-sig that you set up yourself. You should use 3 separate providers of the keys. So like cold card and Trezor, and I think Seed Signer is one of the better ones. And then you would flip coins to generate your 12 or 24 words. Seed Signer has a feature so you can go from the well, actually, you have to flip coins, then you have to figure out what words those coins are, and then you use Seed Signer to find the 12th or 23rd, 24th word. But yeah, so like that whole area, though, I feel like there's still a massive amount of trust being put on these companies when someone just buys a Trezor or whatever they buy. Oh, and then that's not the one last piece about the technical side. Once you have those three devices, you end up with your XPub for receiving Bitcoin. You then, whatever software you use to generate your receiving address, you're putting a massive amount of trust in again, because it could just ignore the XPub that you've given it and generate from its own list. So really, you should have 2 separate softwares for telling you which Bitcoin address to use, and if they don't match, then you can know that there might be something up with one of them. That's just taking things to the extreme, but it is acknowledging where you're putting trust. So we're putting trust in the software that tells you which address to receive on. We're putting a lot of trust in the hardware of the wallets, and we're putting a lot of trust in whatever software we're using. And really, like, the redundancy of having 2 separate things that are not the same company is a big deal for actually making sure that you're not losing your money.
Yeah. I noticed Seed Signer published something or tweeted out something like 2 days ago, and it was a bottle of pills, and it was the words, like the BIP.
Yeah.
Was it 39 words?
I think so.
Like one on each side, so that you could, put them in a bag or a hat or whatever, and you could pull them out and generate your seed that way.
Yeah.
Instead of like actually just printing them out and cutting the paper, which is what I did. And that's a big pain in the ass. But, I totally agree with your point. And I think this is part of the journey, right? Like Bitcoin isn't okay, I've made the decision. Like I've just adopted Bitcoin. Now I'm a Bitcoiner, and that's the end of the road, right? Like I think every aspect of this, from the technical to the philosophical, the political, the personal, all that stuff is a journey. And, most likely one that never ends. Like, I don't think you ever get to the end of any of those things. Like they're always kind of, if for no other reason, that they're always interfacing with the actual world, and they always require adjustment and as a result of that interfacing. And I do, and I think there's probably still a lot of innovation to be done in the realm of custody, in helping people be more comfortable with their custody setup. Like, because when someone's just coming in, I think it's pretty well established that most Bitcoin loss has been through user error than malicious hacking or anything like that. And so for someone first coming in, like getting it off exchange or getting it out of the wallet and getting it in some sort of recoverable or hardware sort of setup, that's probably sufficient until they've become comfortable with that, and they can look at some of the other areas that you mentioned, which are definitely worthwhile, but not. Yeah, you have to be. They're just going to be overwhelmed initially.
Absolutely.
So I've been banging on the like the hashtag 12 magic words things, because like I just want to get it into people's minds that all of this freedom that we speak of, and this optionality, and like this whole Bitcoin renaissance and the orange realm and all that stuff we talk about, it's on the other side of your exclusive access to 12 words effectively. And obviously it gets more complicated from there, but because I think a lot of people may like a lot of normies may even get sold on Bitcoin And then someone tells them like, oh, well, you know, you got to do this and you got to get these 12 words. You got to make sure they're safe. You got to do that. And they're like, oh, yeah, I didn't really sign up for that. I was more into the whole, like, get wealthy and not have to, you know, pay attention to bullshit politics and that kind of stuff. But I think if you start with Bitcoin is about your exclusive access to a set of information, that information is 12 words. Like if that was part of the initial pitch, rather than like, oh, by the way, you need to do this. Like, don't sell them on all the amazing, you know, potential of Bitcoin. Like I think, because that's I mean, to me, a compelling enough pitch in itself. It's like, wait, you're telling me that like all of these things that you're just talking about are on the other side of establishing my exclusive access to 12 words. Like that's my portal in. And so I can have all that great stuff you just mentioned. And I just got to figure out how to custody exclusive access to 12 words. Yeah, pretty much. It's like, I don't know. I find that like mind-blowingly compelling, but I feel like it hasn't kind of been framed that way. And part of that is the broader noise of the shitcoin industry and false perceptions about all this stuff, and the continued use and comfort with third parties, which ironically is, you know, what this whole thing is about, is eliminating those. But yeah, I think if you start with the hard part, basically, you won't get people excited and then get them put off. I think you'll just like, I think it'll be a smoother way into all this. So that's why I've been banging on about it lately.
Yeah, I think, go ahead.
Sorry. My last point about custody was, you know, this Casa business recently, of course, I think it's unbelievably stupid, but on their part. But you know, they have the data, right? So maybe there's actually not that many hardcore Bitcoiners or Bitcoiners at all using their service, and there's a hell of a lot of demand from Ethereum, and maybe they're just choosing to follow their economic incentive, and you know, all the other reasons why you might not do that be damned. But what I found, you know, interesting in all the responses is, it seems like to the extent that people were using them, I'm just surprised that so many people are willing to dox their stack, basically, like to give up that degree of privacy over their funds, you know, that was the biggest surprise for me. Or one.
Yeah, that's a good point. I doubt people even consider that. Yeah, you don't want to make it public how you store your Bitcoin.
No, and then, you know, other people, possibly lots of other people, know exactly how much Bitcoin you have. I mean, how much of a security problem is that? And or a problem with regards to whatever state actions come down the pike in the future. Like, I don't know, just the less information, obviously the less information that you share with anyone, the better. And that's sharing pretty significant information with, you don't even know how many people.
Yeah. I think on the flip side of that, one thing that, do you watch Matthew Kratter on YouTube?
Don't think so.
Trader University. Oh, it's so good. He's a Bitcoin maxi, or Bitcoiner. I don't know what he'd prefer.
Trader University.
Yeah, it's Michael Saylor has tweeted a few of his videos, but it's like a daily short, like 10 to 20 minute video. And he goes into like so much depth on so many topics, and it's fantastic. I can't recommend him enough. But anyways, he put out a video explaining how he custodies his Bitcoin. And I think in his case, it was actually smart to do it, because the way he presented it, he was showing his multi-sig setup where it's like keys in different locations. And it's basically to deter anyone from ever trying to steal his Bitcoin from him. Because as a public figure, if someone thinks that he just like stores it in his head, then he's putting himself at risk to like the $5 wrench attack.
Yeah.
Whereas if you make it public that you have this setup where no wrench attack is going to work, you're kind of protecting yourself.
No, totally. And I mean, I guess it always boils down to what's your threat model. But in those cases, I mean, if the biggest threat in the future is government and not wrench, then, you know, it's pretty easy for the government to acquire that information about who owns what, and therefore where to place their resources and all that jazz. So, I mean, it's all about trade-offs, right? And it always is. But I was just somewhat surprised that the privacy consideration involved in a service like Casa was, I guess, accepted by so many that were now writing those emails like, my service is canceled, I'm fuck you guys, sort of thing.
Yeah. So back to the Casa, they're supporting Ethereum now. What I find frustrating or more unacceptable, like I don't care if a company does what they can do whatever they want, but it's when a company builds their reputation around Bitcoin under the, like, so they're suggesting that they understand what it's all about, and then they go and do something that to me is like, it's going against what Bitcoin is hoping to accomplish. So it's similar with Nick Carter, who invested in it, is that if you are supporting a lot of these garbage projects, you're saying that you don't understand Bitcoin while pretending to understand it.
Exactly.
Because, like, especially if you're wealthy, like, there's no excuse. You have the wealth, you can invest it in things that there's infinitely many things you can support that would support Bitcoin. There's infinitely many things that would not support it. And why would you choose one of the ones that does not support its cause? So that's where I really find it frustrating. Even if these people, like Nick, he's definitely released some great information. But yeah, I find that to be fairly inexcusable.
Yeah, I'm with you. And I mean, even just before coming on this, I was thinking about those very people, and I was like, man, it's crazy to me how many people still don't understand what's going on here. Now, I'm presuming that I'm right, and of course I could be wrong, but if I am right, it's crazy to me how few people still understand it. And of course, a potential rebuttal to that is, no, well, I don't know, because I was going to say they might understand it, but greed maybe they're being driven by greed. But I still, I don't know, if you really got Bitcoin, it's hard for me to see allocating capital to services or projects or other stuff that would take away from increasing your allocation to Bitcoin or betting on companies that are exclusively focused on building on Bitcoin. I guess it's not so black and white, but yeah, I'm with you. Like, it comes down to this question of like, what's your primary motivation and what is your primary decision-making variable? And I think, in fiat world, we've just become habituated to following the price signal a lot of the time, despite the moral dimension to those decisions. And I think in a Bitcoin denominated world, that the price signal will be more moral just by virtue of the fact that it's incorruptible, but that won't be total. And so, but I do think that moral dimension of decision-making, especially, let's say, market or financial decision-making, will be far more prevalent, will be a far more important aspect of making these decisions, and being more clear, like, well, where should the moral line or the principled line be drawn on this particular issue or this particular investment or this particular whatever. And I'm looking forward to that, because it's something that I wonder myself. I don't always know like what's right and what's wrong, basically. And I wish there was more discussion about like what is right and wrong in any given circumstance. And again, I think Bitcoin provides a remarkable tool for making that way easier, just on its face, basically, just by using it. But I also think it's awesome that those concerns, those more ethical concerns, seem to be emerging in the so-called Bitcoin culture as well. And no wonder, because I think that the protocol, the basis of that culture, i.e. in Bitcoin, has those certain principles imbued into it. And I think it's being pushed out into people, and then we figure out what the explicit ethical sort of dimension or dynamic is, and all the better, right? Because hopefully that means we have a more ethical world if those issues are more top of mind and they're given more space to have open dialogue about. And then people's decisions, the degree to which people's decisions are aligned or depart from that is more apparent, and people can confront the consequences of that. right? The social consequences of making decisions that are more clearly that the ethical dimension has been more clearly determined, something like that. You know, I'm hopeful that's going to be the case.
Yeah, I like to think of things under like first level ethics or first layer ethics and second layer ethics. And the first layer is the obvious ones that, I mean, some people think they're obvious, like don't assault, don't fraud, fraud, don't lie, etc. And then second layer is more like don't promote garbage on your podcast to make money. And I think a lot of people just ignore the second one. They're like, it's a free market. Like, yeah, but within a free market, you can still be virtuous or you can not be virtuous. And I do think Bitcoiners care a lot more about being virtuous while like during their financial adventures. The other thing I wanted to say was you mentioned you think you're right about Bitcoin, but you're not sure. Or like you wanted to be somewhat humble about it, I think. But I was talking about this the other day with someone, and they talked about like if Ethereum happens to like surpass Bitcoin, and I realized like even under that situation, like Bitcoin's success, like Bitcoin is money. Money relies on participation of people. So I think the will of Bitcoiners makes kind of the future a lot more certain. Like it doesn't matter what Ethereum does. It doesn't matter what any other thing does. If I've made the decision that this is going to be my money, then to hell with what happens. It's up to me. It's not up to other people, and I'm going to use it. And the more people that make that decision, the more it's an inevitability that Bitcoin succeeds. So to me, I guess you could say I'm something of a martyr. Like hopefully I won't have to be, but like it's Bitcoin is the currency I'm going to use for the rest of my life, and it doesn't matter what else happens as long as it keeps functioning. Even suppose there was a successful 51% attack, like a nation state, non-economic actor just pumps out empty blocks. Bitcoin, the ledger, will not be harmed, and we can always look for a way to circumvent that, to switch to a different hashing algorithm or whatever, just to make it inexpensive. Like as a Bitcoiner, I'll sit and wait while they do their nonsense and waste money, and then I'll start using it again as soon as they're done, or as soon as we find a way to continue using the same ledger under whatever proof of work, or even if it was something else. To me, it doesn't. I do think proof of work is the best solution, but to me, it's about the ledger and what the information, who owns the UTXOs more than anything else. So I guess that also gives me peace to think that it's an inevitability in the sense that I don't give a fuck what other people do. I'm using it, and It doesn't matter.
Yeah, and I'm 100% with you. You're like, I say that just, you know, as a like no knowledge is perfect, right? And nobody can tell the future, and who the hell knows, right? As convicted as we are, and as you say, as much as our own decision is a big part of that outcome, and so you can have a far greater degree of certainty over it because you know you're intimately involved with it. I was just saying, like, who the fuck knows? Asteroid hits, or you know, the future is uncertain. But I definitely agree, and I think that is an important point generally, is to realize that, you know, our participation matters. And it's not just like there's the objective world alone by itself and, you know, our social or conscious world alone by itself. Like the two intermingle, and that's what generates the world. And, you know, this is part of when some people, you know, the critics or the haters or the fudsters are critical of, you know, the way Bitcoiners get on and their attitude towards things and their degree of conviction and all that kind of stuff. I don't think they appreciate that, like, first of all, that a lot of that is happening naturally. And I think the more interesting question is, why is this thing inspiring such consistent behavior? That's a far more interesting question than just like, you know, why is one particular person acting weird or crazy in my Twitter feed? But I think the other is like, I feel like those people discount the degree to which like your determination to get this thing over the line, even if just for yourself, your determination to make that decision, to, go down with the ship, that sort of attitude might actually be, if not critical, but like somehow instrumental or somehow influential in if not the success of this thing, but perhaps the degree or the speed or it's influential in some way. And I feel like oftentimes the haters kind of discount that and brush it aside without the proper consideration.
Yeah, I think it's critical. I think it's the will of Bitcoiners will make it succeed. If you have a money that doesn't have a passionate people who almost treat it like as their highest value, and you have another group with the money where they do treat it as their highest value, I can tell you which one will win.
Right.
Because
all else equal, basically.
Yeah, exactly. So I used to say it was an irrational, like my affinity for Bitcoin was irrational, but I kind of see it as rational in the big picture of how Bitcoin can succeed. It needs as many citizens of Bitcoin as possible. And yeah, if you make that decision, it's up to everyone. They can make their own choice. No one's going to force them. But if you make the decision to join this awesome nation of like people who use this amazing tool, and yeah, you're just going to benefit. So people will gradually see who benefits and who loses. And I think more and more people will come to understand why Bitcoin is so important.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And as I often say, I think the benefits, rather than, let's say the economic or monetary rationale, will suck in far more people, because, whether it's all the different use cases or ways of economic inclusion or making money, that kind of stuff that are granted by the innovation that's going to happen with Lightning, will be far more compelling to 99% of the world population than, understanding why and understanding the evolution of money and the significance of an upgraded money, let's say. Notwithstanding that, like, inflation is definitely one of those things that necessitate people act, it's the type of pain that fosters them to think differently. But even then, I mean, there's plenty of examples where inflation has been crazy for many years, and a lot of people just kind of put up with it, or they at least retreat and are comfortable with the ways it's always been handled, like land and real estate and barter. And I think at a certain point, like, that will shift, because the efficiency and the size and how obvious the benefits of the parallel Bitcoin system will be, there'll be perhaps like kind of a watershed moment where it's almost impossible to ignore it. But up until that point, I think it'll be just the experience of anything to do with value, and the experience of just your daily life that's imbued with this system of value will be so far superior that, like, people will just opt in because they're incentivized both economically, socially, and perhaps in other means to do so.
Yeah, that makes me think of like people. I've been thinking about people who buy Bitcoin. Like, do we want people who are not Bitcoiners to buy Bitcoin? That's basically the question in my head. And
I don't really care, because I don't. They'll either become Bitcoiners or they won't have Bitcoin anymore. Like,
yeah, of course. But the point I'm trying to make is, like, if someone buys Bitcoin and has no interest in treating Bitcoin as money,
mm-hmm.
then at some point there's a good chance they're going to just sell when it goes up.
Mm-hmm.
And then it creates this artificial price so that Bitcoiners have to pay more to buy their Bitcoin. So to me, what makes Bitcoin extremely valuable is the amount of Bitcoiners who own Bitcoin, because they are intending to use it as money, and they will, again, have the infinite demand for it. So they collect it forever, and they will spend it. I will spend it. But I'll always try to have more at the end of the day. I'll try to earn more and provide more value than what I'm consuming.
Yeah.
And I think that's what leads to it being a long-term, having its value, price in US dollars or whatever, having it more stable and more reliable than just the kind of cyclical pump and dump situation it's in right now.
Yeah, totally. I agree with that completely. I mean, those are the people that basically give it its value because they are demanding it for so many different things and so highly, so, but again, when you're monetizing something from zero, you're going to have speculators and you're going to have people that don't understand it. And you're going to have people that are just trying to make a quick fiat buck. And that's just the nature of the beast. And so that means there's going to be volatility for a time and maybe forever, but most likely I think that will peter out as more and more people appreciate it for what it is. And it kind of creates that more stable floor. And as it becomes a larger portion of global money stock or global wealth, let's say, then you'll need, then it'll stabilize for that reason as well, because whatever percentages, are those people, are those kind of speculative moves will be relatively less in comparison to the whole. Now, how long of a time period that takes to play out, who knows if it's this decade or decades, or it's hard to imagine it's longer than decades. Because I think, again, the efficiencies and the benefits that Bitcoin provides will just be so apparent that I can't see the cat kind of staying in the bag for decades and decades of a period. But, who knows? I mean, it's a crazy clown world out there. So people can perhaps keep their head stuck in the sand for quite a while. What's interesting, a moment ago, you were saying, we were talking about this kind of identifying with Bitcoin, the nation, more generally. And of course, people have characterized Bitcoin as a nation or as a religion or all sorts of things. And it's really interesting to think about. And I often do, like, why it is that people ascribe so much meaning to this thing, and therefore kind of in that way tether their identity to it. And, that's something you want to be, I think, careful of, but also not just dismiss out of hand. Like, I think there's a very legitimate reason for doing that, and most likely very meaningful and beneficial ones. But if you just look at how, like, and this is kind of a trite observation, but you talk about Bitcoin as a nation, and like Bitcoin has a flag. Now, not everyone has signed off on it, but the sovereign flag, I think Matt uses it for Citadel Dispatch, but I can't remember who developed it, but it's the black and orange with the little like castle turret or something on it. And we have our sort of like sayings, right? Don't trust, verify, and strengthen numbers. And, it's like all these things are slowly emerging, and they're being kind of tested in the social and the memosphere to see like how resonant they are with the fundamental ideas, or at least the fundamental ways in which people are thinking about this thing. And then if they pass that test, if they stand the test of time a little bit, they kind of get attached to this thing. And over time, the amorphous blob becomes a far more identifiable entity, in that it's like, and of course it would, because people are looking to understand what it is they're so interested in, they're so curious about, they find so meaningful. And I think it's almost a natural process that would attract other things that one represented or help communicate it or are a representation of it in some way, and then help you further establish your relationship with it in some weird way. So not that I want to recreate the nation state model of flags and anthems and all that stuff, because maybe that's been more divisive than it has been unifying, but it is interesting, just to be a part of this phenomenon and see it all play out.
As long as you're worshiping virtue, then I think it's fine.
Wow, that's a great way to put it. Yeah, I totally agree with that.
Here's a question. What do you think the population of Bitcoin country is right now?
Pretty low, to be honest.
I would agree.
They say like 150 million people hold Bitcoin in the world, and that's like people that have $5 to everyone else, I guess. But the people that would jive with a conversation like this or nod along, I mean, this is totally arbitrary. I have no way of knowing this, but like my gut would say in the tens of thousands?
Yeah, I think I agree with you. Because if it ever approaches 1 million, then you can only imagine what happens when you have 1 million people who save their wealth in Bitcoin. There's no way they're getting 1 Bitcoin each per year.
Right.
And then when you look at, so I look at like the UTXO set size. So that's, do you know what a UTXO is? So like the number that exists right now is around 80 million. So that means there's got to be less than 80 million people who are holding their keys to their Bitcoin. And it also means like if you're a Bitcoiner, there's a good chance you have 100 to 1,000 different UTXOs. So then you like, yeah, it's just, there can't be that many, I guess is the result. But I hope, yeah, if we can just keep growing the Bitcoiner size, that's the most important thing, I think, to the success. But as a software developer, I'm going to spend more and more time trying to improve the user interface, because I do still want to like give people the best experience when they get exposed to Bitcoin, and then hopefully lead them to go down the Bitcoin rabbit hole. I think right now we're really far from the user interface that it needs, in terms of like, if I want to tip my barber in Bitcoin, I still don't think there's an acceptable way to do it. That's like truly effortless. I mean, if you look at, I like to look at the internet or like email and compare how that used to be and how it developed, and then looking at how that would apply to Bitcoin, the user experience. So like when email first came out, you'd run your own email server, and it was just a very manual process. And I think we're still very much in that stage. When you talk about Lightning, the fact people like Lightning is the same as talking about SMTP, and people are not going to think about Lightning, nor will they think about SMTP when they send emails. So I think a big part of that will probably be Fediment, because it allows you to, like it has the future where you could just download an app, someone sends it to you, it's there right away. And then hopefully the interface will make it clear what you own and how you should custody it, and like gradually kind of push people towards more and more sovereign ways of holding their Bitcoin. Because I don't know if you know much about Fediment, but it's non-custodial. They custody, you don't custody.
Yeah, it's like a multi-party custody model with like community custody sort of model, right?
Exactly.
Like it's interesting. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, what I like about it is it gives us a framework under which the entire planet could use Bitcoin. Because the Lightning Network, it would be completely impossible, given its current state. I don't know. There's stuff about channel factories. I don't know how that would work. But in its current state, you can't have everyone opening channels on the Bitcoin base layer. It's just too slow for that. So if you want to onboard the entire planet, Fediment can handle it, which is nice. But then, of course, it's losing the sovereignty, the owning your own keys. But yeah, I think that it's one of the most exciting but also scariest parts of Bitcoin development right now, because it's like people, when it goes to convenience, then people use Gmail. And if Fediment if there's a implementation of Fediment that is the new Gmail, like it's the easiest to use, the most popular, and people just all use that, then whoever's running that is going to end up with a lot of control.
Right.
And
exactly.
There's a huge risk there. So
yeah.
But as long as we're careful, and when you consider that if you have funds on one Fediment, you can move it to another Fediment instantly, and you can have tools that could automatically do that regularly, so that you're not keeping your money in someone else's custody for too long, or too much of it in, like, you could create a fraction of how much you want to trust a certain betterment. It will at least enable having the user interface that will, people will be like, okay, this is insanely easy. Like, I downloaded this app and it's just sending me Bitcoin, or I can send it and there's no cost. And then if you want to take the steps after the fact, then you can.
Yeah. I mean, I'm excited to see how that develops as well. Obviously, it goes without saying that there's going to be a lot of different doorways into Bitcoin, and about how, like, at the beginning, perhaps there wasn't, right? Like, your option was to buy Bitcoin and custody it yourself, basically, or hold it on an exchange. But I think as these options develop, they're going to appeal to different people. And, it might very well be the case, even though, like, we see the thesis, we are projecting into the future, couldn't possibly be more bullish and just, buying and custodying Bitcoin as much as we can. But I think it's quite possible that the value enabled web, whether that's via Lightning or another layer or whatever, is just going to be so compelling and fun and new and novel to a lot of people that, maybe the next billion come on and they just have like a hot Lightning wall with $100 in it. It's not their channels or anything like that. And they do it to play their video games or to interact on social media or to publish and consume content or whatever. And they just, it's first, it's fun. It's like, wow, like, I can take the money that I made playing World of Warcraft, and, like, every time you kill a character, like, the coins pop. I haven't played video games for ages, so forgive me, but the money in games, and I can take that, and then I can boost a podcaster that I like, and even that's super rudimentary. So, like, and then I can order food from it because Uber Eats, whatever, accepts Bitcoin. Like, just the fact that so many of your interactions will be connected via the same value layer. And I think initially that'll just be like novel and fun, whether it's from an income perspective or work or probably not that. And then the light bulb moments may happen, and then people will get more serious about looking at it through the lens of their wealth and their future and that kind of stuff. But I just really think that the possibilities for online experiences are going to be so improved by having this value enabled component made possible by Bitcoin and additional layers, that, like, maybe, like, you won't have to worry about 12 words and all that jazz at the beginning. Like, yes, you're taking more risk, and yes, you may lose your funds, but you're just playing around with this. And as it becomes more compelling, then you further go on the journey of understanding it and figuring out how to custody things more securely and figuring out which kind of way you want to go. But because people respond to fun, right? Like, people respond to silly, people respond to entertaining. A lot of people don't respond to, like, dry, boring thesis about why everything's fucked and how this is going to fix it. That's for, us kind of perverse people. But I mean, and you can look at the history of the internet and social media and stuff, and it's like, just stupid shit becomes insanely popular. Like Snapchat. I've never used Snapchat or whatever, but, like, it's, as far as I know, it started as, like, you take a video and you send it and it disappears after like 10 seconds or whatever. It's like, okay, that sounds kind of silly. Yeah, it is kind of silly, but, like, 1 billion people downloaded it and used it for whatever reason, because people are silly, and that's how, that's how we seem to interact. And so I think the degree to which the value enabled stuff will amplify those experiences and generate really novel ones that also have, like, a lot more interoperability components that's relevant in their actual life, because we're dealing with money here, not just information, could possibly be, like, a huge impetus for a lot more people flooding in.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more on that. It makes me a bit sad to know how much mental or how much talent has been wasted on the shitcoin industry, knowing that, like, the entrepreneurial builders in tech are largely on the West Coast, and so much of that has been getting funding for just building, just a total waste of building And imagine if they had to put those creative brains towards something using Bitcoin. Um,
I
yeah,
agree, but that regret felt by some of those people, be they investors or developers themselves, might just give them that extra invigoration when they finally see the light. You know, they might be extra motivated because they'll be trying to make up for lost time or lost revenue or finances or whatever. So
yeah,
this goes back to our point about like the peace that Bitcoin instills, right? Like I'm confident that Bitcoin and Bitcoiners will find its way in the end, and everything will, water will find its level and we'll be all right. And that doesn't mean to take it easy, and that doesn't mean not to think adversarially and all that kind of stuff. But that's, again, like more broadly how I think things are going to play out. So that itself gives me a sense of peace, and I don't worry about or spend time thinking about just how much time and capital has been wasted on so much stuff, not just in shitcoin land, but particularly in shitcoin land, because retail investors have lost a ton of money and a lot of time has been wasted. And basically it's just served the VCs and the scammers that made off with a ton of undeserved money, let's say. But what are you going to do?
yeah. I'm curious, do you have a roadmap for yourself personally about how you intend to use Bitcoin in the future? I'll explain a bit more. Like,
Sure.
Right now, I'm new to Bitcoin. So for the past 2 years, I've just been putting a lot of my savings into Bitcoin. And then I see that in probably 2 or 3 years, my goal is to keep only Bitcoin and hold no fiat currency whatsoever. Mm-hmm. If needed, I might use a credit card and then pay it off with Bitcoin using, like in Canada, there's full Bitcoin for doing that. And then I'm hoping within 5 or so years to start seeking out only Bitcoin, only companies that accept Bitcoin to spend money. And yeah, I'm just kind of trying to see a transition from like just saving in Bitcoin to eventually only using Bitcoin, only supporting people who participate in Bitcoin. Yeah, so that's my question. Do you have a roadmap, anything like that, or?
I don't have a roadmap, but my general like position or approach is like I want to be using as much Bitcoin as possible. Now that like it depends where you are. Like in some place, if you're in El Salvador, that's pretty possible, even though they're like some people still only accept cash and that kind of thing. But you have ATMs where you can get cash for Bitcoin and stuff like that. So you could live fully on Bitcoin in El Salvador. In other places, you have to do the gift card game, or it's really starting to become far more frictionless. But there's still a certain degree of friction, especially again depending on where you are. So, but ideally, like I would want to be using only Bitcoin. Because why would I want to be using another money? Like and for me, it's because people say, well, don't you want to save in Bitcoin and spend the bad stuff? It's like, yeah, but if you're only taking in Bitcoin, or even if you're not, like whatever fiat you have, that could be Bitcoin right now. It's just that, for your expenses or whatever, you're leaving in a fiat. But of course, I'd rather have my whole life just be on Bitcoin for many reasons. I'd like all my savings. I don't want to hold any fiat balances because, at that level, like where it's if you're holding a small cash position, it's like less than 1% of your savings, let's say, it's not really material in terms of Bitcoin's price swings, whether they be down or up. But I just want to opt out of the systems that I believe are immoral or unethical or generating outcomes in the world that I deem to be either suboptimal, or broadly speaking, negative. Like I don't want to participate in those games, basically. And so opting out everywhere where you're tacitly or explicitly or implicitly contributing to those things, I think is the way you end up getting the world you want to see. So only using the money that you think is ethical, and only doing business with the companies that you think are ethical, and only, like all the way down. and I'm not there yet, but I am on that journey. Like the same with all the software stuff you use and whatever, like whether it's Gmail or Apple or whatever, like you have this, I think Bitcoin is a peaceful revolution, and I'm for peaceful revolutions. And the way you do them most effectively is you just starve your opponent. And whether that's the central banks and the issuers of fiat currency, and whether that's the governments that, you know, parasitically prey on you, or whether that's the big tech who's, you know, selling your data and subjecting you to algorithms and all that kind of stuff, the only real approach is to, one, tune out to the extent that you can, like ignore them and not let them interrupt that peace we were referring to before, but also starve them. Don't give them your resources, time, attention, data, money, none of it. And if we all do that, we don't have to wait for some politician to enact a new law or, you know, whatever. We determine the outcome that we have and the freedoms that we have and the people we want to interact with and the culture and the society and the market we get as a result. We by starving them and having pent up demand for people that do things ethically to the extent we want to, you know, purchase those products and services, then that's how we do it. That's how we maximize the incentive for the so-called good. However we might define that, is we generate that pent-up demand by opting out of all that other stuff, and then someone at some point will come along and service that demand. And if it's sufficient, we'll say, hey, yes, the product and service is one that I derive value from, and it's predicated on or offered with ethical standards, or, you know, ethical standards that I accept. So I'm a customer now. And that's how I don't want to be too presumptive to offer advice to people usually, but like, if you're critical of things in the world, I think that's the only real way you get any different result than what we have. You have to starve what you don't support, and you have to feed what you do. And Bob's your uncle. You have a world erected of things that you support, especially, you know, the longer time goes on. So to answer your question, no timeline, but I opt out as much as possible and use Bitcoin as much as possible.
That idea of starving the enemy, I guess, is very much why I asked the question. Is since Corey Clipstein was talking about having a minority that is like very passionate about something and how that can sway things. So I'm just thinking, like, as Bitcoiners, if there's a point where you, like, Bitcoiners are calling grocery stores and saying, do you accept Bitcoin? Okay, I'm not shopping here. If that happens enough, then you're forcing their hand. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm wondering. Like,
and you're seeing it. I mean, that's kind of that's how the circular economy develops, right? Because let's take an easy one, but this has happened in like Texas and parts of the States where a lot of Bitcoiners want high quality meat, and they'd prefer to work with other Bitcoiners. And so what's happened, this meat initiative has popped up where, you know, you can buy high quality meat raised by a Bitcoiner, and you can pay Bitcoin for it. And that's that pent up demand being exercised. And it'll probably initially be like those small sort of local circular economies where, you know, a Bitcoiner that sells wine, who I've had on this podcast, or a Bitcoiner that sells meat, and a Bitcoiner that sells whatever, like, because it's becoming the case now that, like, there's Bitcoiners that do all sorts of things, right? And they want Bitcoin. And so they're going to offer their products and services, and people are going to demand them. And later on, as it grows, you know, to your point, the normal market participants will catch on, and they'll be like, well, I want some of that. How do I get it? And it'll be by operating along certain ethical standards, most likely. And it'll be about accepting Bitcoin, and it'll be about, you know, they'll have to respond to that demand. And the bigger Bitcoin gets, and the more wealthy Bitcoiners become, and the greater purchasing power Bitcoin has, the more that will happen, and people will just be responding to those demands. And again, I think that's the easiest path to get to the place that it seems like we all want to go, which is a more fair, a more free, a more consensual world.
Yeah, that reminded me of another thing on my roadmap of Bitcoin transition that I intend to do that might be useful for other people. is I'm going to eventually tell my employer, I'll give them some fair warning that I want my contract to be denominated in Bitcoin. Not just, I don't want my pay in Bitcoin. It could be, I want it to be in Bitcoin, but that's not the point. The point is that it actually is measured in Bitcoin. My salary is based in Bitcoin. And I'll agree to, like, you can renegotiate it once a year or once every 2 years. But if they don't want to do that, then I'll leave. And the intention there is they have to buy Bitcoin ahead of time if they want to pay my salary that's denominated in Bitcoin. So as long as people own Bitcoin, it's easy to do contracts in it. But when you don't own it, it's hard to do those contracts. So that's another way that I see that I'd like to get to in the future. So paid in Bitcoin and salary measured in Bitcoin.
live by the sword, die by the sword.
Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah, the intention is really to force people's hand, because if I want nothing to do with fiat dollars, that's critical. I can't ever accept it. I don't want to touch it. I don't want to exchange it for Bitcoin. I want to only work for the ethical money that has unforgeable costliness, that wasn't printed to debase someone else's money. And yeah, I'd really like to avoid ever touching it within, I don't know, as soon as possible.
Yeah, 100%. I love that. You mentioned a couple of times that you want to, or you are working on Bitcoin related software or solutions. I'm assuming, are you? And is that your prime work, or is that like a side hustle?
So I've done some work with a Bitcoin company. I won't name them. Just small little like side hustle thing. And I work for just a regular software agency full time. But I have been studying up on actually building tools. And I am working on something. It's kind of tangential to Bitcoin, but not directly. It's just more so in line with what, do you know John Carvalho? Mm-hmm. John Carvalho. His work with Pseudonym. I was listening to a podcast that inspired me about, like, your private and public key being your identity, and what we can accomplish in that, just using that. And then, like, if I know your public key, you can sign data and you can publish it, and I don't care where the data comes from, but I can know that that data is yours. So basically around that idea, I'm kind of working on a side project right now, just to explore what's possible using, like, when people take custody of their identity. And this very much comes back to the 12 words. 12 words is not only your property, but 12 words could be your identity, and no one can confiscate it. And if you have a server, it could be a third-party server that's serving your blocks of data. If they are compromised, it doesn't matter if you own your identity, because you can just start sending out blocks from another server, and it's impossible to censor that. And I, not only for just like following tweets or something, but it can also be used for, like, I think it could be used for coordination on the internet. So, like, protocol negotiation. I don't know if this is getting too technical, but, like, if you want to receive money in a specific protocol and I want to send it, say you use protocols A, B, and C, and I use C, D, and E, then this could be used to, like, find out that we both use C, and behind the scenes use that protocol for sending money or sending a message or whatever. What I'm really looking at is how we can make new protocols easier to start using. So, like, right now, if you build a new protocol and you're like, you have to get someone to download the app and all that crap, but we want to be able to have more experimentation in protocols, because I guess I keep saying the word protocol. Protocols to me are the key to decentralized web. Blockchain stuff is all nonsense. It's all about having these open protocols, because a protocol anyone can use. It's just a set of rules, just like our nodes follow a set of rules. And the more experimentation we have on protocols, the more decentralized we can make the internet, basically. So yeah, I've been kind of sucked into that, very tangential to Bitcoin. And I definitely intend to, in the future, look at how it can be used for payment specifically. But right now it's a lot more broad.
Yeah, I love that. And, it's not, it's technically it's all that stuff is over my head, or I haven't spent the time to really investigate it yet. But just on the surface, it makes sense to me that in an environment where people are going to end up having a high degree of, or like very carefully custody a piece of data, like your seed phrase, let's say, or your seed words, what could that then enable? Like, how much other stuff in the digital world could you attach to that, for access rights or whatever? And knowing that, like, because it's so, you'll be able to maybe port your identity or move around different protocols or platforms or what have you, with your money, with your identity, with your data, and all that kind of stuff, by virtue of having that one piece of information, one piece of access information so secure, right? And that's the thing that you never lose. And by virtue of that, a lot more flexibility or accessibility or something like that opens up for what has traditionally been just like a bunch of walled gardens and a bunch of siloed information and a billion different passwords and a billion different identities. Like, maybe all that will be dissolved. And just as you'll be able to take the sats that you earn in World of Warcraft and buy a pizza with it, you'll be able to take your followers or your identity from one platform and bring them to another. Or, again, the details are foggy and it's above my pay grade, but it seems sensible enough to me. Like, the premise seems logical enough, and hopefully people like you will work on it.
Yeah, I think you're bang on. The idea of, like, I think Seed Signer is such a great tool and such an important tool. And it's just the idea that you can scan some data and sign it in an offline way, and then it goes back onto the internet. And to me, that's the key. It's like this offline thing, your identity, if it's done properly, that thing is always offline, never touches the internet, and you sign. And then from there, you can always, of course, have like you could have a hot public key or private key, and your cold one. And the cold one is used just for signing the main critical things. And then from the hot one, that can actually manage more of your day-to-day.
Right.
And then the other thing that's really exciting in this realm that also John Carvalho was talking about is the web of trust. So that's the idea that now that we have this public key, private key as your identity, once I have said that I trust you, and then, or you say that you I say I trust you, I can also see everyone you trust, and then that just branches out. So if you have 10 hops there, that covers the entire planet in terms of creating that web. But that could definitely be a way of replacing like DNS servers, which are like monopolistic and rent seeking and just crap. Like, if you come up with a business name, I think it's absolutely ridiculous that you have to then check if the domain is available, and if not, you change your business name. Like, the idea with this web of trust is that I would be able to, if John has a business with whatever name he wants, I can see, oh, this is John's business, and I can visit, because all I'll have to do is find out what IP address you've signed to know, like, oh, this is where it goes. And then the IP address would be completely hidden, of course, like it's lower level stuff, but it can do it through verification of, like, I trust this is John, and I trust that this is his business. And it's really removes so much potential for scam, because it's really hard to get into a web of trust as long as you're diligent. I think that's another really exciting part of this, like, decentralization and just what public and private keys being more familiar to people, what that can bring about.
Yeah, man, you could think about the possibilities forever, and I often do. And I just find it so exciting that so much more power and control and freedom the capacity to bring so much of that back to the individual is emerging. The primary thrust through Bitcoin, and then a lot of other stuff likely as a result. And what, again, I think we all kind of suspect that the initial tearing away from the fiat world and the tech world as it's been established up to this point could be somewhat uncomfortable and potentially somewhat tumultuous. But, it's all of these things are basically freedom enabling, privacy enabling, which is obviously freedom enabling, wealth creating, abundance accessing, freedom of expression, freedom of speech technologies, and they're all kind of emerging simultaneously. And I look forward to what that future causes all of us to consider, and how it, we started this conversation off with how Bitcoin has changed your perception, how it's brought you that peace, dialed down the noise, allowed you to focus on what's important, change your values a little bit. And so when that is more developed, and when that's had time to work upon us, and when you layer on those other services or products or technologies that have similar benefits, where does our attention go? Where do our resources flow? What do we determine to be most worthy of our limited resources? And what do we end up wanting to create, express, broadly speaking, do? I have no idea what the answer really is to that, but I'm super jazzed to be confronted with the question.
Yeah, and talking about like freedom and freedom enabling technology, that reminds me of like when I first got into crypto stuff, like I was interested in learning about it. It was so apparent right away that all of these projects talking about DeFi, decentralization, but no one gives a damn about decentralization, and no one cares about like any of the values that are important in any of these projects. So it's like it was very obvious very early to me that like these are not like, if the crypto industry cared about decentralization and privacy and self-sovereignty and all those things, the top two cryptocurrencies would be Bitcoin and then would be Monero, and most of the others would be gone. But the fact that Monero, which again, I don't support Monero now, but the idea that fungibility should be at the base layer is a worthwhile idea to compete. But most of the other ones are not even in the ballpark. Like they just don't care about that stuff. It's just shiny new tech. And like, yeah, as someone who was interested in like the Pine phone and the Librem phone, which are like phones that run Linux, I was very interested in those because they are removing the monopoly from Apple, and just just having those values coming into crypto, it was just so obvious immediately that this cares not at all about decentralization. It was very obvious that it's just a new way of making money by printing money.
Yeah. A money printer for everyone. Buy my sushi token and buy my whatever the fuck.
Yeah.
Yeah. Totally agree. And but
I was just going to say, I wonder if investors like Nick Carter who invest in some of these projects, if it's a lack of technical understanding that promotes it. So it's like, it's for one, it's making money, and two, it's making money and it's like too complicated for them to understand. So instead of like looking at what will actually accomplish whatever they want, it's just like, okay, I'll buy into this thing. I wonder about that. If it's like a technical lack of understanding.
I think.
And even so, go ahead.
No, you finish.
I was just going to say, even like looking at Ethereum's roadmap and how complicated that stuff is. As a developer, I would be embarrassed to like present something so complicated because it normally means that it's no good. Like you have to simplify things. Like the Bitcoin white paper was 9 pages. That is genius. And just to some people can get sucked into thinking complicated means intelligent, or that complicated means sophisticated, whereas it's like the opposite of the truth. And I feel like that's a huge problem in Ethereum, where it's just like people don't quite understand what it is. They don't know what it's capable of. So they kind of assume that the people building it must be very intelligent and building something very important or whatever, and it's a way of people getting sucked into it. Yeah, I definitely think that's a lot of what gets people into those things.
I agree. And I think that's part of the reason why so many so-called smart people miss Bitcoin, because it is in a
So
sense
fascinating.
well, yeah, but also so simple. And like a lot of people think, well, surely based on my intellectual capacity and the magnitude of the problems that we're facing, like the solution has to be hard to see. It has to be complex. Like it has to be uniquely available to those able, like, with the prowess to see it, let's say. And so I think those you could say those people tend to overthink it in a way, combined with what you said, which is like there's just a black box of like all this tech that people don't understand. And so like, a skinny guy that looks a bit weird, surely he's got to be the genius that like knows all about this stuff. And you're basically just, betting on him and thinking like, well, he certainly looks one of those weird geniuses that is way smarter than everyone. So I guess I'll believe the same. And you end up missing, the very simple answer that is right in front of you, as you said, in the Bitcoin white paper and what Bitcoin represents. And I also, you bring up like Nick as an investor, and I don't really want to shit on anybody here. I don't have much interest in that, but it is fascinating to me that typically the ones that end up taking that kind of approach, they reveal themselves to be, I mean, we're all imperfect, but they reveal themselves to be perhaps less humble and more egotistical than one seems to need to be to accept the truth about Bitcoin. Maybe that's a weird way to say it, but like those types seem to always lack humility. And I think that's what causes them, in a sense, to like go to those other places, and rather than, just realizing that Bitcoin is the thing of value here. And then another criticism that I often hear, and again, we could spend like another 4 hours on this particular topic, so I'll just, skim over it. But, people will criticize like the Bitcoiners that get too hardcore about things. They'll be like, guys, chill. Bitcoin is not a belief system. It's just a protocol. It's just a new form of money. And I like it too, but there are other things in the world. And I think it's like, no, you don't get it. You are a belief system. You are. And you impose those things onto things that you interface with in the world. You develop a relationship with things, yes, and inanimate things based on your belief system. And the question is, well, why? What about those things resonate with your belief system? And I think that, again, like it almost comes down to a certain like humility in a certain respect. Like, are you willing to see, how should I put it? Well, it kind of goes back to what we said earlier. First, are you willing to see that this is a participatory relationship, right? It's not like just two separate entities. Like it is what it is because of you, and you in turn are what you are because of it. And that's kind of the relationship of interfacing with objects and ideas and other people in the world. Like we are mediums of exchange in that way, human beings. Like we're constantly taking in data from the outer world, putting it through the inner filter, putting it back out, and we're the medium that's doing that. You might say that that's kind of the idea of the logos, in Christianity or in philosophy. And I feel like those people that criticize and say, like, guys, settle down, it's not a belief system, they fail to appreciate that element, that everything is, and that it does matter how you think about things in terms of what they become. And I can't help but think there's an element of arrogance or ego that causes them to be somewhat blind to that, and therefore maybe not place sufficient importance on, or maybe not value certain attributes or characteristics or principles in certain things when they are there, because it's almost like they're somewhat blind to them in themselves, and therefore it's difficult to see them out in the world. Again, this is a super long conversation, but I wanted to get that little snippet out off my chest.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better.
Well, we're coming up on 2 hours here. Did we not cover something that you wanted to discuss, or
no? This was great. I was
last words before
pretty nervous. I'm not a public speaker by any means, so it was great, and I really enjoyed it.
Yeah,
Gotta go cook some lunch.
Yeah. Well, for what it's worth, I thought you did great. And I appreciate
Thanks.
you putting up your hand and coming on for a chat. And it's always great to connect with other Newfies, especially other Bitcoiner Newfies. So yeah, love the conversation, and hopefully we can do it again sometime.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Thanks for having me on.
All right, brother.
And yeah, talk to
Take
you later.
care. See ya.
See ya.